The mist in Nemo doesn't just settle, it possesses. It crawls into the seams of your jacket and the marrow of your bones. A cold reminder that everything you thought was solid can be washed away by a single season of bad luck. My name is Jeffrey. I am 64 years old, and for 31 years, I was the man who ensured the signals moved. From the muddy trenches of the BC Telecom days to the high-level boardroom architecture of the TELUS era. I was a senior network infrastructure engineer. I didn't just fix things. I designed the nervous system of this province. I believed in redundancy. I believed in fail-safes. I believed that if you built a foundation deep enough, the structure would never lean. I applied that engineering logic to my marriage of 36 years. Caroline was my North Star, the constant in every equation. Together, we built a life that was supposed to be the gold standard of stability. We had the house in Nanaimo, paid in full through decades of discipline. We had the RRSPs, the diversified portfolios, and the quiet pride of people who never lived beyond their means. We raised 2 children, Preston and Mara, teaching them that the world rewards the steady and the prepared. Or so I thought, then the system crashed in a way no engineer could predict. Caroline got sick. It wasn't a sudden break. It was a slow, agonizing erosion of everything she was. For 4 years, I watched the woman I loved disappear behind a veil of pain and medication. In Canada, we like to brag about our healthcare, but there are shadows the system doesn't reach. To keep her at home, to provide the specialized nursing, care that preserved her dignity, to modify our house into a medical facility, and to pay for the experimental treatments that bought us just a few more months of conversation. It cost everything. I didn't hesitate. You don't calculate the ROI on the love of your life. I sold the stocks. I dipped into the retirement funds. Eventually, I sold the very foundation we had built. The house, when she passed 14 months ago, I was left in a vacuum. After the final bills were settled and the estate was closed, I was a 63-year-old widower living in a short-term rental that smelled of industrial cleaner and cheap carpet. I had a car, a storage unit full of memories I couldn't bear to look at, and a checking account that was screaming toward zero. I spent my days in a folding chair staring at the beige walls, trying to figure out how a man who had spent 30 years preparing for the future had ended up with no future at all. My son Preston lives in Victoria. He's 36 now, working in a mid-level operations role for a financial services firm. He's a man of spreadsheets and protocols. During his mother's illness, he was a ghost. He would call and ask for status updates as if he were checking the progress of a shipping container. He visited twice in 4 years. He told me he couldn't handle the energy of a sick room. I forgave him then. I told myself he was young, that he was protecting his own family, his partner, Diane, and their pristine life in their upscale Victoria neighborhood. I was a fool. 3 months after the house was gone, I called him. I didn't ask for a dime. I just told him I was struggling. I wanted him to hear the tremor in my voice and say, "Dad, come over for Sunday dinner." Instead, he gave me 11 minutes of corporate sympathy. "That sounds really tough, Dad. Let us know if there's anything we can do." It was a line from a handbook. It was the verbal equivalent of a thoughts and prayers post. 2 months later, the walls of that rental unit started closing in. I didn't want a handout, wanted a bridge, just needed to know I wasn't invisible. I drove the ferry to Victoria on a Tuesday in October. It was a miserable day, the kind of gray that makes the ocean look like liquid lead. I didn't call ahead. I knew if I called, he would find a polite way to postpone. I wanted the truth. Wanted to look my son in the eye and ask if I could sleep in his guest room for 60 days, just long enough to finalize a consulting contract. I was chasing and secure a permanent lease. I parked in front of his house. It was beautiful. The windows were glowing with warm amber light. I could see the silhouette of a life I used to recognize. I walked up the path, my shoes clicking on the wet stone, and I knocked. Preston opened the door. He didn't open it wide. He stood in the gap, framed by the comfort of a home I had helped him buy with a down payment years ago. I could smell garlic and roasting meat. I could hear the muffled sound of a news anchor on the television. He looked at me eerily, looked at me, and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He didn't see his father. He saw a liability. He saw a man who might ask for something he didn't want to give. He saw Masinzas entering his controlled environment. "Dad," he said, his voice as smooth and cold as a polished stone. "This is not a good time." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't ask if I was hungry. He didn't ask where I was staying. He just closed the distance between us with a polite, final rejection. I stood there on the porch for 3 seconds, the mist turning into a steady rain. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I just said, "Okay." And I turned around. I drove to a Tim Hortons near the Swartz Bay terminal. I sat there for 3 hours with a single cup of black coffee, watching the rain lash against the window. In those 3 hours, the grief that had been suffocating me for 14 months crystallized into something else. It wasn't rage as hot and messy. This was cold. This was engineering. I realized that Preston had just performed a stress test on our relationship. And the results were clear. The bond was non-existent. He had treated me like a failed asset. Very well. If I was an asset, I would prove my value, but not to him. Never. Again to him. The next morning, I was back in Nanaimo. I didn't wallow. I didn't sit in that folding chair. I picked up the phone and called Howard. Howard was a man I'd known for 20 years, a former colleague who had started a boutique telecom consulting firm. He wasn't family by blood, but we had worked in the trenches together during the 2009 infrastructure builds. I told him exactly where I stood. I told him I had 31 years of seniority, a deep Rolodex of municipal contacts, and a hunger that a younger man couldn't comprehend. Howard saw what Preston couldn't. He saw the latent power in a man who has nothing left to lose. We met at a Greasy Spoon in South Nanaimo. He told me he was bidding on a series of massive municipal contracts for mid-sized cities across the island and the interior. He had the business structure, but he lacked the high-level technical credibility to close the deal. He offered me an equity partnership, no salary for 4 months. Just pure sweat equity and a split of the back-end revenue. I moved into a motel that charged by the week. I ate canned soup and spent 18 hours a day over blueprints and contract proposals. I used every ounce of my 31 years of experience to design networks that were cheaper, faster, and more reliable than anything the big corporations were offering. I was a ghost in the industry, working from the shadows. I didn't call Preston. I didn't call Mara. I went dark. By month 4, we landed the first contract. By month 5, the second and third followed. The revenue didn't just trickle in. It hit like a dam breaking. I moved out of the motel and into a luxury suite, but I didn't stop there. I took my first draw from the business, a significant sum manned. I went to see a commercial real estate broker. I didn't want a house. Houses are emotional. I wanted a fortress. I found a mixed-use commercial building in the heart of Nanaimo. Ground floor retail, residential units above, solid brick, generating a 7% cap rate without even trying. It was a machine that made money while you slept. I bought it 6 months to the day after I had been turned away from Preston's Porch. I sat in a high-rise office in downtown Nanaimo. The sun was actually shining for once, hitting the glass of the boardroom table. My lawyer, a sharp woman who specialized in ironclad estate planning, placed a stack of documents in front of me. "Are you sure about the exclusion clause, Jeffrey?" she asked. "It's very ... definitive." "I've spent my life building things that last," I told her. "This is just another piece of infrastructure. If a component fails the stress test, you don't keep it in the system. You bypass it. Sign the papers." These documents moved the building, the business equity, and all my future holdings into a private trust. My daughter Mara was the sole beneficiary. She had been the one who called me every night in that rental unit. She had been the one who offered to drive up from Vancouver just to sit with me in silence. She had stayed. Preston was not mentioned in the document. Not as a secondary heir, not as a trustee. To the law and to my legacy, he had ceased to exist. As the ink was drying, my phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID showed Preston's FISA photo taken at a Christmas dinner years ago when we still pretended to be a family. I didn't feel a surge of anger. I didn't feel a need to gloat. I felt nothing. It was like looking at a dial tone. I turned the phone face down and finished the meeting. I walked out of that office as a man of means once again. But I wasn't the man who had worked for BC Telecom. That man was soft. That man believed in the goodness of blood. I am something else now. I am the owner of the door. That evening, I finally called Preston back. I was sitting on the balcony of my new place, looking out over the Strait of Georgia. "Hey, Dad," he said, and I could hear the subtle shift in his tone. He had heard something. Maybe through the grapevine. Maybe from Mara. He sounded ... interested. "I've been meaning to catch up. Things have been so crazy here with work and the house. I'm sorry I've been out of touch." "It's fine, Preston," I said. My voice was as level as a horizon line. "We should get together," he continued, gaining confidence. "Maybe you could come down to Victoria this weekend. Diane would love to see you. We can do dinner properly." I looked at the water. I thought about the smell of that roasting meat 6 months ago, thought about the mist on my face and the sound of his door clicking shut. "I'd love to, Preston," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "But honestly, this is just not a good time." I hung up before he could respond. I didn't block him. I want him to be able to call. I want him to watch from the sidelines as I build this empire for his sister. I want him to realize that when he closed that door in October, he didn't just keep out a grieving old man. He locked himself out of the only thing he actually values, the future. The revenge isn't in the money, it's in the clarity. He taught me that relationships are transactions, and I simply finished the trade. I am 64 years old, I am wealthy, I am powerful, and I am entirely alone by choice. And for the first time in my life, the infrastructure is perfect. To those of you listening to this on true revenge stories, remember this: never mistake a man's silence for his defeat. Sometimes we are just in the basement, reinforcing the walls before we tear your house down. Take care of yourselves, because if you don't, no one else will.